Tamus, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you, Cathy?
Good, good. Yeah, so President Trump just spoke to the nation last night. What's your biggest takeaway?
Well, my biggest takeaway is that there are certain things we don't know which are very important. That's
For
my biggest
example?
takeaway.
Okay, for example?
Because when you hear the commentary, even of experts, and I've been listening and reading experts who support the war, who are against the war, and they all have very sophisticated arguments for or against. But I feel that especially in these situations when there is like back channel negotiations and we don't know what's happening and everybody's lying. Trump could say that it's going well, maybe it's not going well. The Iranians say it's not happening, maybe it is happening. So I feel that let's put it this way. Some people think, and I'm not one of them, that the American leadership doesn't know what it's doing. It hasn't gamed anything out, and that they're just, completely lost. I don't buy that. I think there are very serious people there. So if you take into account that there are serious people there, then the fact that at this moment the Strait of Hormuz is still closed to most ships, the fact that Iran hasn't publicly surrendered, that there's no deal, and yet President Trump says the objectives as the United States define them are close to being accomplished within a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and that there are negotiations and that the people there seem to be less hardline than before. To me, it means that many things are happening that we are not aware of. And it would be foolish to assume that we have all the relevant data to make an opinion. So in my mind, the biggest takeaway is the conspicuous absence of certain types of information that would tell us what's really going on.
For example, like what's the information that's missing that's very critical, actually?
Well, first of all, the true situation of the Iranian regime. How much capacity is left? How many missiles, how many missile launchers, how many generals, how solid is the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, how tight is their grip of power, who is really in control, how hard it would be to take over Karg Island or one of the other islands in the Gulf. All of these things may sound a little bit tactical, but they may mean a lot in terms of the end result. The other thing I would say is that people throughout both of Trump's presidencies have, they even invented a term called taco. Trump always chickens out. And I actually don't think that's true. And if President Trump says that if no deal is reached, they will blow up the power plants, the oil, the desalination plants, then I think the Iranian leaders should take him seriously. Because historically speaking, usually, he means what he says, even though it may not happen exactly when people expect it to happen. And I think the reason those essential places have not been attacked so far, even though the US can attack them, and it's not more difficult than attacking military targets, is thinking about what happens after, right? If there is a deal or if Iran is defeated, if they don't have power plants, if they don't have oil, if they don't have desalination plants for drinking water and irrigation, then how can they rebuild their nation? So I think from that perspective, since I think both the United States and Israel they have nothing against the people of Iran, they want to give them a chance to rebuild their country. But you shouldn't think that this is like a permanent chain on the US and Israel. If they decide that the calculus has changed, they may decide to destroy those things as well. And some people have blamed Israel and the United States of doing to Lebanon or maybe Iran, what Israel has done to Gaza. I don't think that's true at the moment, but if you know, in Gaza, 80% of the buildings are either seriously damaged or destroyed. And, all the infrastructure is destroyed and things like that. So what I'm saying is that some people, I'll put it this way. One can imagine the United States as a very dangerous guard dog held by the United States military, held by a very short chain. And within the arc of the chain, the dog is very dangerous. But outside the arc of the chain, it can't reach you, so you feel safe. So people start to do all sorts of strange things. But the point is that the United States president holds the chain, and he can just let it go, and then the dog will go where people didn't think he can go. And it happened so many times during Trump's presidencies that, from my perspective, I don't think the threat of attacking the infrastructure and the oil infrastructure in Iran is fake. I don't know if President Trump will decide to do it, but I don't think it's fake.
The other thing is Trump mentioned in 2 to 3 weeks, the United States military will take more bombings and actions. But after that, does that mean that the Trump administration will just finish this war? What's your understanding?
Well, that goes back to the first thing I said. We really don't know, and the fact that he says 2-3 weeks, it can be a week, and it can be a month. We don't really know. But I think part of that speech, from my perspective, is aimed at both the Gulf states and at the European NATO allies and the East Asia countries that are buying oil from the Gulf area. Mm-hmm. And because the other thing that President Trump said at that press conference and at other times is that the United States doesn't really need the oil and gas that passes through the Strait of Hormuz, but both Europe and countries in East Asia do need it. And since they didn't help with the operation, after the United States achieves its goals, which are no nuclear, no ballistic missile industry and all of those things, then those countries should take care of the Straits of Hormuz and the Gulf and just take it. So I think that timeline is also, I guess, a shot across the bow for those countries to get their act together and figure out what to do before time runs out. And I think either today or tomorrow, something like that, there's actually going to be a meeting in London of maybe 30 countries to discuss that. So it seems like they've taken the hint and are scrambling to figure out what to do.
Do you think they will reach some action items or just discuss and talk?
I think it's really hard to predict what is going to happen. I think not all countries are the same in this sense. Even in NATO, there are certain countries, whether it's like Poland, that have been rearming and being, if we look at the definitions of the American administration being a good ally, but other countries that the Trump administration has singled out, whether it's Spain or France or the UK, who have put all sorts of limitations on using bases, military bases, and flying across those countries. It seems like, they will have to figure out what to do. And so far, many of these countries have tried to distance themselves from the war despite the American pressure. Now, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and it's kind of hard to tell how history will judge this, right? I'll just give you an example. During World War II, people thought before World War II, people thought the French army is very mighty, but when push came to shove, basically France surrendered very quickly to the Germans, and they were seen as very weak, and maybe still people see them like that. But at the same time, the cultural treasures of France in Paris and Versailles and all of these things were preserved and not destroyed. So all I'm saying is, when you take a very long-term historical perspective, we don't know why these European countries, what will happen in the end, what will be the meaning of that. But definitely the more immediate result is that the US administration is seriously reconsidering how useful NATO is. It doesn't mean that the US will leave NATO. It doesn't need to leave NATO. It can just take out its soldiers from different countries and, and move them somewhere else. It can do all sorts of things without any formal action. Like people talk about quiet quitting in the office. It can do the same with NATO. And I think when it comes to NATO and looking at the Russia-Ukraine war, I'm not sure that is what the European countries would really want, but we will have to wait and see what happens.
Some people saying, I saw some posts on the X saying Iran turned Hormuz into a controlled gateway and a big opportunity, and that Trump created a global energy crisis out of nothing. What's your take? And also on the other side, some people are also saying, Russia, like Putin is just smiling and, taking more money from this war because of the energy crisis.
Well, you asked some very big questions. So first of all, using the United States administration's explanations, the reason they decided to go to this war is that they don't believe Iran should have nuclear weapons because, as they explain it, it's a crazy clerical apocalyptical regime that if they have nuclear weapons, they will not act like a normal country with nuclear weapons. They may actually use them. And the Iranian nuclear industry, even though they claim it's peaceful, was always built like under a mountain. Why would you build something under a mountain if it's just civilian? Why won't they just buy uranium from other countries and use civilian reactors? Why do they need to enrich it themselves? So it seems like from the United States and also Israel's perspective, Iran was pursuing a nuclear weapons program. And a big part of it was destroyed over the summer, but it seems like they started rebuilding it. And the other side is the ballistic missiles and drones, which they built a lot because they don't really have a normal air force. But the logic, as the American administration explained it, is that if they have enough ballistic missiles and enough drones, then it's basically a shield from attacks on their nuclear programs. So since after the 12-day war in the summer, they started rebuilding their ballistic missile and drone capability, maybe making like 100 or 200 ballistic missiles a month. A decision was made that you can't, and since it seems like they restarted their nuclear program and they started rebuilding their ballistic missile shield against attacks, it was decided that they should be stopped. Like we talked in previous interviews, the exact timing, I think, was more about having the intelligence on when to catch Khamenei and all of his leadership to be able to kill them. So that the timing was tactical, but the decision probably was strategic because it seemed like the negotiations were not going anywhere. So that's, I guess, the answer to the first part. So what President Trump has said that they had to take this detour. Yes, it has a short-term impact on the economy in the US and around the world, but when it's over in a few weeks, things will rebound. So you need to take the short-term pain to make sure Iran doesn't start extorting all the other countries because they have nuclear weapons like North Korea, but it's just that North Korea doesn't want to take over the Far East, and Iran, it seems like, wants to take over other countries. So the logic is, yes, there is some pain, but we have to do it for the long term. So that would be the logic. We have to see if that's actually what happens, because not all plans happen as people want. And in terms of the energy crisis, yes, again, we have to see how long it takes. I think part of the thing that's troubling people is the tight integration of all industries, because the oil and gas industry is not just oil and gas, because the byproducts of that industry is fertilizers and sulfur and helium. And a lot of the fertilizers used in big parts of the world, not necessarily that much in the US, but other places, are coming from as byproducts of the oil and gas industry in the Gulf area. And when you plant your crops for the summer, you do it now, in the next few weeks or maybe month. And if you don't plant them with a fertilizer, the crops will be smaller, and that may cause in 4, 5, 6, 7 months shortages of food and high food prices. So the implications of anything like that go beyond oil and gas.
Yeah, definitely. And the impact is not only on the foreign nations, but also in domestic, in the US. Would you think that's probably one of the other reasons that Trump chose yesterday to make the speech to the nation?
I'm sure that there are multiple reasons why President Trump chose to make that speech. I'm sure he's quite aware of the politics and the midterms that are coming. I think he feels he still has some runway. He doesn't have to finish immediately. But of course, I think President Trump wants the Republicans to keep the House and the Senate. Otherwise, the next 2 years will be a lot harder to pursue whatever policies President Trump wants to pursue. So I'm sure he's aware of that, and that's one of the considerations, as any president should, because at the end of the day, foreign policy is sort of downstream of domestic policy, because every president is elected by his own citizens, right? So the first duty is to serve the citizens of the United States, and foreign policy is an extension of that. It's not a completely separate thing.
What's your reading, from his speech that he's trying to convey to his voters?
Well, I think the message is very clear. We had to do it. It's for the long term, but it's a short-term pain, and later things will get back to normal. I think that's basically the message. And I think the message is for the whole country, but also for the people who voted for President Trump, and some of them voted for him not wanting to get involved in any foreign wars. And I think he's trying to explain the logic of why he's doing that. He gave one example of the length of all the wars the US was involved in the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, which was like months and years and years and years. And this operation is only 30-something days, to give perspective to the American people. But again, we'll have to see how long it lasts.
Yeah. Trump's strategy, we can see, he always tried to use the diplomacy side of him, right? Always trying to use the economic development, prosperous and opportunities to try to negotiate with foreign countries. But so far, from what I observed, it's working with some of them, but so far has not totally working with Russia, North Korea, Iran, and the CCP, China, Communist China. I don't know, how do you see, and could you just share your perspective on that topic?
Yeah, I think that's actually a very interesting point. I think that regimes or governments that care about their own citizens and don't have some very strong ideological drive, then it's easier to have negotiation with them and use leverage with them and have incentives and disincentives and reach some sort of deal that you can actually sign. But when you're dealing with very ideological regimes or governments, and such governments also don't really care about their own citizens, then basically any negotiation is they're just buying time until they negotiate when they're weak, and when they are strong, they break whatever deal you make with them. And that happens with Hamas, that happens with Hezbollah, that happens with the Iranian regime. And that's definitely what's always been happening with the CCP. And I think the common thread of all the countries you mentioned is that they're all basically, I don't think they will like that I'm saying that, but I think from the perspective of the CCP, they're all its proxies. And in the sense that it's been financing all of them and supporting them. And so you can see that they all share these same traits. Some people say birds of a feather flock together. I do not think that they're all the same. In the sense, for example, I don't think there is complete alignment in terms of interests and values between the Russian regime and the Chinese regime. And I think many presidents, both Democrats and Republican, whether it was the Obama administration or the first Trump administration, they really tried to get better relations with Russia. One of the reasons is so that, they're not pushed to the side of the CCP. It hasn't worked for various different reasons. Some of them probably the fault of the American administrations, and maybe some of them because the Russian regime decided certain things. But at the end of the day, we can say that all the countries you mentioned are supported by the CCP. And without the support and the financing of the CCP one way or another, I don't think any of those countries would be in a position to keep doing what they're doing.
It's hard to know really like what how Trump views that and how he's, the whole administration, understand this. But from your analysis, what's their level of understanding of this issue?
It's really hard to tell. The only thing we can do is look at the public actions over time and try to see if we can see a pattern. And it seems like if we don't look at the words people say, but at the actual actions people do all the time, because, for example, President Trump can congratulate a leader one day and the next day say his whatever derogatory term in terms of, that really depends on, whatever
he will
America
say,
wants to do with that,
friend.
if they're happy about them or not happy about them. But if you look at the actions over time, it seems like, I think one of the most important speeches of this administration, not by the president has given many speeches, but by somebody else, is the speech by Secretary of State Rubio at the Munich Security Conference a couple months ago. And I think anybody who wants to understand what I think is the philosophy behind the Trump administration's policy should watch it. It's like 20 minutes. And it's really worth your time. Maybe you can provide a link in your description or something like that.
Yeah, I actually did a whole translation of that.
Okay, so I would recommend your viewers to go back and watch it. But I think what Secretary Rubio said there, this is my understanding, one of the things is over time, various countries, including the United States and including many countries in Europe and in the West, however you wish to understand it, have delegated their sovereignty to international organizations, to international law, to all sorts of concepts, and not act as responsible nation states in terms of having the ability to defend themselves, having an industrial base in their own country, outsourcing their supply chains, their production to other countries, or not just other countries, but who are adversaries and rivals of the West. And I think it seems like what the Trump administration is trying to do is to change that within the United States, whether it's to make the military stronger, but also to reindustrialize the United States, to reshore supply chains, to do all of those things, and also to encourage other countries who are considered allies, whether they're in Europe or other places, to do the same thing. And I think the rivals or adversaries that are not named in that speech of Rubio, the main country is China, and the main regime is the CCP. And, because when you listen to the whole speech, he doesn't say that, but, it's very clear who he's talking about. And, he's the chief diplomat. He has to speak in a certain way. The American administration, other countries feel they still need to have relations with the CCP. being the ruler of a big country. But I think at least at that level, I think they have a sense, and they're acting systematically to do that. And if you look at Venezuela, at Iran, at maybe Cuba, even in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, all of these countries, we just said they were proxies of the CCP. And if you take down those proxies, the CCP is more alone and more exposed. So perhaps that's another pillar of that strategy, to take away the CCP's leverage over the West and the United States in terms of industry and supply chains and all of those things, and also to peel away all of its proxies. Whether the administration or President Trump still believes a real long-lasting deal can be made with the CCP or not, I don't really know. I don't feel I have a way to know. Personally, I don't think it's possible. It's not in the nature of the CCP to be able to do something like that. But I don't know in terms of how the administration views that specific thing, which I think is very important.
So on the other hand, so what's the reaction inside Israel about Trump's speech last night?
Well, because last night was Passover Eve, and so it's basically holiday, so everything is a little bit delayed. And also it seems like the Iranians decided to give Israelis a gift, and there was like 10 consecutive missiles, one after the other. We had sirens. Everybody had to go to their safe room. Or if they were driving to relatives, they had to get out of their cars and lie on the road until the siren is over.
So is that more than usual?
Yeah, that was a lot more than usual. I think it was the Iranian.
So you think it's intentional?
Yeah, like to disturb one of the major Israeli holidays. There were almost no casualties, but it was uncomfortable. So I think in terms of reactions, everything is delayed because it's sort of like Christmas. So you don't get a lot of reactions. I think the issue in Israel is what we actually started with. People really don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So a lot of people in Israel are afraid that America will say we won and leave, and Israel will be stuck with Hezbollah and with Iran and all of those things. I'm not sure that's what's going to happen, but I think many people in Israel are afraid of that. That at a certain point, the interests of the United States and Israel will diverge, and the results will be enough for the United States to declare that they've achieved their goals, but not enough for Israel. And Israel will be stuck with the bill. I don't know if that's true. And I do think that Israel and the Israeli military have gained a lot of credit in the eyes of the administration in terms of their participation and capability. But I do know a lot of people in Israel are worried about that. So we will have to see. But in terms of official reactions will probably be very nice. But in terms of how Israel is going to deal with that, we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, and in the beginning, you mentioned something very important, is that what's the real situation in Iran, right? Especially with the regime. So in regards to that, do you have any information sources or indications to kind of analyze the realities inside Iran?
It's
and
really
also,
hard.
It's very hard. Yeah, I can imagine that. And also the people there inside, right? How they feel about the current situation, and what's going to happen.
It's really hard to know. I think the challenge in terms of the regime is, if you want to make a deal, you need to make a deal with somebody who can enforce the deal on his side, right? So if, for example, the United States does a deal with somebody, whoever that is, but there is a whole faction of the IRGC that doesn't accept the deal, and that person can't enforce the deal on them, then there is no deal. So one of the things we don't know is how cohesive is the leadership. And if whoever you make a deal with, are they credible enough in terms of, are they going to keep the deal, but also are they credible enough in terms of, can they enforce it across the whole of Iran to make sure everybody abides by that deal? And that's one of the things we don't know. It seems like from some reports that the so-called civilian leadership, the clerics, position is downgraded and the IRGC position is upgraded. But I don't know if that's propaganda or true. It's really hard to say. In terms of the Iranian people, it's really hard to say. President Trump said, I think, at that press conference that back in December and January, when they were demonstrating, 42,000 people or 45,000 people were killed. So obviously there is a lot of resistance to the regime, but probably there is still a lot of support. So I'm sure if the regime falls, a lot of people will be happy, but they will ask the question that everybody asks: what's next? Is it better, or is it worse, or is it the same, or is it disintegration? And it's really hard to tell. I mean, there are lots of sources and a lot of information. A lot of it contradicts each other, and I don't feel I can say this is true, then this is not true.
Mm-hmm. The situation in Iran is really complicated. And also the information is limited. So anything else you could share with us just from the current situation?
I think that there has developed this notion that wars that the United States or any big country gets, or even a small country like Israel gets involved in recent decades, they're never decisively won. Whether it's Vietnam or the Iraq War or Afghanistan, and for Israel, it was Lebanon for 20 years. Now Israel is back in Lebanon, but it was there for 20 years and it just unilaterally left Lebanon in 2000 and now it's back. And Gaza. And so there is this notion that with certain regimes or certain countries, whether it's like the Russia-Ukraine war, it seems like unlike maybe past situation, it's really hard to finish a war unless somebody just takes a step back and says, I'm done. And I think, at the tactical level, achievements of the United States and Israel are very impressive. And I think Russia is looking at it and the CCP is looking at it and many are looking at it. And in terms of the CCP, they're also looking at the performance of their technology that they sold the Iranians, like the radar and missiles and all of those things that failed miserably. And when they see the firepower of the United States, maybe they're thinking, about Taiwan, maybe we're not ready yet. So in that sense, it's pretty important demonstration of power. In terms of whether this thing can be resolved or is it going to be another one of those ongoing things, I think that's really a test. And we'll have to see what happens. And I think it's in the interest of the Iranian people and everybody in this area and also of Europe and East Asia and everybody. It's in everybody's interest, except, the people who are riding a tiger in the Iranian regime, the same people who are riding a tiger in the Chinese regime. Except for these people, it's in everybody's interest that it's actually over and there is a deal. And if it is, it will be a new thing, because something like that hasn't happened in a very long time in the world. And we'll just have to see whether something like that really happens and it's over and we can move on, or whether it drags on. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether this happens. And I think if it happens, it can give hope to many people in many places that military conflicts can end decisively. And we'll just have to see whether that unfolds or something else unfolds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about the display of power, it was said that in China, quite a few, the experts, so-called experts in the military weapons, probably just disappeared or just died recently. I don't know what's, whether you
what I've heard
that.
is probably that they developed some of the systems that were given to Iran, and those systems failed so badly that, in China under the CCP, if you fail, maybe you don't just get fired, maybe you get disappeared. So that's one of the explanations I've heard, that, all the architects of those systems that they said can detect all the American airplanes and stuff, and they failed. So that's the punishment. But, I don't know if they have a big, deep bench of experts in China to replace these people. I can't say. But it seems like the actual battlefield effectiveness of many of the weapons the CCP sold to Iran and also to other countries is a lot less than advertised. And that's probably a good thing for the world.
In the next 2 to 3 weeks, as Trump mentioned, what do you think it's worth watching out?
I think a lot can happen. If the United States escalates with ground troops or trying to take some island or not, I'm sure they will do what they said they will do, and Israel will do what we've already discussed they're doing. They will intensify the attacks as much as possible. Maybe not yet hitting those targets we discussed before, the civilian infrastructure targets, but they will intensify their attacks as much as possible to achieve as much as possible within that time frame. It will be worth looking at, whether we hear something from the Iranians and if it's uniform. But the other thing is we'll have to see how all the other countries are acting. It was reported that the UAE wants to take some more aggressive actions to open the Strait of Hormuz. We'll have to see what Saudi Arabia and all the other Gulf countries do. We'll have to see what happens with NATO, as we've discussed. And so I don't know if there is anything specific to watch out for, but I would say that whether it actually ends in 2 or 3 weeks or not, President Trump has put a marker. And I think everybody will try to figure out how they should, in what position they should be in 2 or 3 weeks, whether it's the European countries, the Gulf countries, Israel, the Iranian regime, India, China, Japan, all of those countries, they will try to imagine where they want to be in 2 or 3 weeks and try to do as much as they can to be there, to be at where they imagine they need to be at that time, so they're ready for whatever they think will be the next step. So it will be interesting to see where they think they should be. It seems like, as we said before, some European countries at the moment are saying we don't want to get involved despite President Trump's heavy pressure. We'll see if they are able to maintain that or not, and where it leads.
Okay, so anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. I heard an interview with, I think, a Norwegian person living in Iran in one of the aid agencies. She's still in Iran, so probably she couldn't say everything she wanted to say. She gave an interview to one of the UK newspapers. And she said that, the people in Iran, they don't have sirens like in Israel. So when a bomb drops, it just drops. And some of them left the cities for the countryside. Some shops have closed. They still have food. They still go out to coffee when there are no bombs. And the same in Israel. Maybe we go 5, 6, 10 times to bomb shelters every day, but when the sirens are off, we try to live life as much as we can. In Israel, the coffee places, people go to buy coffee when there are no bombs and no missiles. So I think people are just people, and it's whether they're Iranian and under the Iranian regime, whether they're Israeli living under the Israeli government, or any place else. People just want to live their lives, and sometimes I think it's important to remember that.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much again, Tammuz, for sharing your thoughts and views with our audience.
Thank you so much, Cathy, for having me.
Okay, yeah, keep safe.
Thank you so much.